Hey guys, so Phantom Nightmare is right around the corner, so I wanted to do a tier list of the best decks as we approach this new format. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, usually I do tier lists based on data from Dueling Book data, from Scope, as well as YCS and regional level topping information. But of course, this format hasn't actually started yet, so we can't do that right now. So I'll probably do that in a couple weeks instead. Let's just get right into this tier list. And actually, I should mention, if you're looking for Phantom Nightmare singles, definitely use my code Hakuna5 at either Card Brawlers or Tier 0 games. Definitely check those out. So tier list, let's just start with Branded Despia, I guess, because I know this deck more than the other decks because I've been playing this exclusively for the past 11 months straight now at this point. I do think it has a pretty good position in the upcoming meta as well as the current meta. Of course, it's actually gotten a good amount of regional tops so far. And of course, again, something like Fire Kings, they do have some form of card destruction protection through Branded Opening. Mirror Jade Banish is always nice instead of destroying things, which, of course, really makes Fire Kings happy. On top of that, Gimmick Lock is, of course, quite strong. I will say, though, is that Fire Kings, I find, can play through Gimmick Lock a lot better than most decks out there, just because they are able to play on like the opponent's turn, basically. So the Branded Despia player's turn, just being able to like record bodies and everything and kind of set up stuff as well. So it's not a given against that deck, but I do think Branded Despia is going to be pretty strong. It doesn't die to Droll as it will with a lot of other decks moving into this new format. Of course, it kind of loses, can lose pretty hard to Ash, but sometimes it can play through it quite well as well. Now, Labrynth, I'm still going to put it at tier 1 for now. I think so far, even post-Maze and post-transaction rollback, it's actually been a little bit disappointing in a sense, at least in terms of regional level tops. In the Latin American Moto YCS, though, the most recent event, it actually did have the most representation, but of course, it did not actually win the event. That would be Tearlaments with Raphael. Congrats again. So I think Labrynth, I think I still want to put it here. Transaction rollback, like, yeah, it is quite strong. It didn't get any hit on the ban list, but I think it is going to take a little bit step back compared to some of the other decks that will be in this tier 1 section. And you know what, to be honest with you, let's just start right away with Fire King. I'll just put it here at S tier. Realistically, I think, like, technically, yeah, it's tier 1. Is it tier 0? I'm not quite sure, but at the same time, as my friends would say, I don't think it's really fair to put Fire King along with any of the other decks, because I do think that it's going to be kind of on a realm on its own. It's going to be quite strong with all the new Snake Eyes stuff. So next, let's just cover another branded deck in Chimera. So, it's really weird. This deck has really fallen off compared to, let's say, like a few months ago, of course. And, it usually, since release, has been kind of like half a step above Branded Despia in terms of representation. But honestly, this post-January ban list has really fallen off in terms of regional level tops. Definitely, I'm not really sure how to explain that, to be honest with you. But I guess Despia Gimmick Lock is just that much stronger, maybe, if you were to compare just those two directly. But you know what? From a budget standpoint, it's actually quite affordable deck from my understanding. So it's still an option for you out there. Marin says we're also going to put this in Rogue because it, of course, has some regional tops so far. I actually provided a recent one on my channel with Manuel. He actually topped 2 regionals post-January ban list. You really can't sleep on this deck. Even throughout, like, the last half year, at the very least, has always, like, snuck in, like, even a YCS level top multiple times. So, clearly it's got some potential under the right pilot. It can play a lot of hand traps, which is really nice. Its end board isn't really all that oppressive, though, but, I mean, I guess it still gets it done somehow. Sprite, I have mixed feelings about this one. So far, regional level wise, it has been doing actually quite well. I mean, they did get started to 3. That's not like a groundbreaking change or anything, but just a nice little bonus consistency booster. Moving into this new format, I do think, Sprite going first is still strong. One of the things, I played Sprite for quite some time until Elf got banned, and then I kind of ended up ditching it, but its grind game is noticeably weaker since its tier 1 days. The other problem with Sprite, going second is very hard if the bodies don't stick, because they need their level 2s, and if you can pop the bodies, like those kind of decks with those kind of interactions, has always made it kind of hard for Sprite, I felt. Maybe I just wasn't playing it right, but, Fire Kings, obviously, they just pop a lot of things. I presumably will be a little hard. The plus side with Sprite is they can side Shifter, and against, Fire King, that is pretty deadly. Now, Sprite doesn't necessarily play optimally under Shifter either. It's just that they can play under it better than probably a lot of decks out there, except for Familiar Kashira. So, it's still an option. I don't think you can sleep on it. They've proven it, people wrong time and time again. It is very consistent, so I'm still going to put it at tier 2. Vanquish Soul is another deck I would also put at tier 2. Regional level wise, it's actually done pretty solid, honestly. And it's been like that since release, really. Like, it's always kind of like slept on, but still always get some form of even YCS level top. I believe at the Latin American remote YCS, it also got a top as well. So, you know what? It can also play Shifter. That's kind of a nice bonus as you enter this new format post Phantom Nightmare. So, it's been doing pretty well competitively. So, I do think it's got a place here. Earth Machine, this is kind of funny. I decided to include this here, and that's because it actually has 3 regional tops at the very least that are known post January ban list. One of them, which was on my channel, which you can check out as well. So, you know, while it does have those tops, at the same time, obviously from a kind of overall representation standpoint in terms of level of play, amount of play, I should say, probably doesn't actually see all that much, but it is a very budget deck as well and has some potential, you know, in terms of, especially when it comes to Fire Kings, you know, popping things. Like, they have some interactions where their stuff gets popped as well. So, you know, I guess it's kind of a nice situation for them. This picture represents more so like resonator kind of decks, and there's kind of different degrees to that. And this is primarily, you know, mixed with like bestials as well as runic, and sometimes horrors, and even sometimes with the adventure package. The amount of actual resonator cards really vary. Sometimes they only play like as little as maybe like 6 cards. Others quite a decent amount of package. I do think it's especially for those that play a lot more of the, you know, resonator cards and more so like a Red Dragon Archfiend kind of deck. I think it's still pretty interesting. It's gotten a several amount of regional tops so far, actually, and you know, like Red Dragon Archfiend, it's kind of pretty cool. Like, they have like an Omni Gate, they have the guy that just banishes everything and it keeps coming back. It's kind of annoying. On top of that, they're all really big bodies, and that surprisingly can be a little bit challenging to get over for some decks. Not to mention, they actually gain life through Red Resonator as well continuously, and again, along with those big booties, like, they gain a lot, which you, of course, Red Resonator, you're probably more familiar with Sprite playing that in time. But I do think, you know, this deck is still something at least worth putting in a tier list. Another thing, we're going to mention Flunder. Okay, so I think probably many people would put it at tier 2 maybe, especially because of Shifter, you know, Fire Kings moving into the next format. I'm still going to put it at Rogue for multiple reasons. Okay, let's talk about current format right now, post-January. It has not done well even at the regional level at this point. Kind of surprising to me, actually. And then even if we rewind a little bit further, when tier elements were, you know, still a very strong deck, you know, they still had Keldor or rather, sorry, Kelbeck and whatever, the one that mills 5. Even then, Flunder was actually struggling to get YCS level tops near like that tail end, even when those cards were legal. So that's why I'm still just going to put it here at the top of Rogue. Who knows, maybe it kind of flips between tier 2 and whatever, but I think I'm going to just put it there for now. So this picture more so represents Bestial Runic, you know, essentially the list that Joshua Schmidt made very popular when he won YCS Bologna a couple months ago. So at the beginning of the January format, it's actually done quite well. It's kind of tapered off a little bit in the recent times. I think it's still, you know, Runic deck's still pretty strong, so I'm gonna put it here for now. I think Bestials, it's a little bit iffy post new format, you know, a lot more fire stuff, even more than now, so maybe it's not as good, but for now I think it has enough regional tops that I will put it like somewhere in tier 2. Ghoti, so I was talking to my good friend Eric. He actually plays this deck, which is, I guess, kind of funny on its own, but I think he was saying he would put, with the new support, he would put this between Rogue and tier 2. Let's just put it at Rogue for now, just in terms of, because it's kind of hard to assess this at this point realistically, right? I mean, we don't have any kind of regional level success with this deck for the most part up until this point. Of course, now it actually has some better support. For now, I think it's safer to put it in Rogue, but you know, it does like banish a lot of things. I mean, that's always kind of nice interaction in most formats, so let's keep a close eye on this deck. Goblins, though, I was also talking to another friend who is going to play this at some point in this format. Didn't have the highest praise for this deck. I think for now we'll put it in this other section. It's to be seen. I don't think there's really that much hype with this deck, unfortunately. Really like a lot of XC summoning, which is always kind of cool, and we'll get to XC summoning a little bit later as well. Dark World, I'm also going to just put it in other. It did have a regional top recently. I actually did I have a deck profile on my channel as well for that. You can check that out. So Dark World is presumably probably not going to be that good because Droll is in the format right now, but it's obviously going to be in the format next format too. And also on top of that, Shifter to combat the Fire Kings, which also makes it really hard for Dark World. Now, if you don't have any of those things, then yeah, Dark World is probably going to win if they go first. So it's kind of like those high rolly decks. Like if they go first, like they're probably winning for the most part. So I would still put another despite that regional top. Mikanko, I'm going to put it somewhere in Rogue. I don't want to be too specific where, just because it's a little It actually has at least 3 regional tops that are known so far, post January ban list, post Isolde ban. But you know, with like this, I was seeing some replays post Phantom Nightmare with like Snake Eye stuff with Makanko, so I don't know, maybe that kind of boosted up a little. I'll just put it somewhere in Rogue. I think it is still worthy mentioning in a tier list. Orcus is another one. We'll put roughly somewhere around here. It actually had a pretty good amount of regional tops at the beginning of the format, the first couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks kind of tapered off. I think it did at least have one top at the Latin American Remote YCS though, so that's kind of good to see. I mean, I did kind of predict that, you know, especially at the beginning of the format, you know, everyone wants to try out Hardcore coming back. I did suspect there would be quite a decent amount of regional tops and they would just sort of taper off as the hype kind of dies down. Who knows, maybe it's still solid enough. It's typically played with like runic stuff and or horror stuff, and maybe like this shows, I don't know, but I do think it's at least still worthy of being at the very least Rogue, right? Like, it is getting a decent amount of regional tops and hopefully it continues. So Centurion, I would put this also at tier 2, maybe around here actually, I think. And also it's good because they're actually getting some new support sometime down the line. And I was always saying how, you know, these side deck sets, let's say like Rescue Ace, Makanko, as well as Pearly, you know, on release they were pretty bad, and it was like the second wave of support that made them good. But Centurion was already good from its first support, so it can only get better. I think, you know, I think it's almost unfair to call it only a Calamity lock deck. I think we have to give these players a lot more credit than that. I do find, you know, going against this deck multiple times, like they really can't pull off wins without going into Calamity. You know, that Quasar Synchro Dragon is pretty good, and they can play a lot of hand traps that also are, you know, they serve as interruptions themselves, and they have like their own inner archetype like trap to banish cards as well. So I think this deck is really, really solid. The regional level tops has kind of tapered off the last couple of weeks compared to the beginning of the format, but I do think that maybe it's more like a one-off thing. I do think that it will still stick around there, and it doesn't necessarily like die to Droll, for example. I guess if you have like super heavy Samurai stuff, if you start with that maybe, but for the most part it's pretty good into a lot of different hand traps. Voiceless Voice, this is going to be a new one, of course. I think this actually, we'll put it at tier 1 for now. I think it is actually maybe even better than Labrynth. I think it's, maybe I'll kind of shift around there. You know, going through at least, of course, we won't know for sure because we still have to wait for actual events, but I think it looks very, very promising in terms of the type of kind of combos it can pull off. And, you know, having like an Omni Negate, they have like the trap that can like pop and stuff. And who knew that Zoravis had another effect other than targeted protection and being basically like a solemn warning or whatever. So, you know what, I do think it's pretty exciting to see this deck as a ritual-based strategy as well. I'm also kind of curious about like branded Voiceless Voice decks, just because I play branded myself, since, you know, rituals are not part of like the extra deck that would kind of branded fusion would lock you out of. So kind of interested in that kind of playstyle as well. So I'm really excited to see the results for this one. Sword Soul, honestly, not much to say about this one. I'll just put it Rogue. It actually has a few regional tops so far. So moving to the next format, I mean, you know, it's like the most plain vanilla kind of deck. There's not too much to say about this, I'm sure. I feel like regardless of the format, Sword Soul does just okay and enough to make a tier list. So I'm going to put in Rogue. It is also a very, very budget in terms of building this deck because they don't play SP for the most part. And if you saw my regional top cut breakdown, you'll see this was actually the cheapest topping deck in the past couple of weeks. Oh, we should have also talked about Snake Eye. This is also, of course, going to be a new tier 1 deck. It's kind of like on its own, really recursive in terms of all the bodies it can regenerate, but also just a hand advantage as well. It can easily make like Appaloosa and technically IP. It like starts in the spell trap zone, comes back up, and just like even has some synchro plays on top of that. So I think this deck on its own is also going to be quite strong and pretty exciting. Pearly, this is honestly, I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on this deck. I don't know with post Phantom Nightmare if there's a huge shift. Obviously, I guess like technically I think goblins have a good matchup, but you know, it's not going to be meta. And you know what, regional level top wise, it's actually done quite well so far. Same at the lines of like Sprite, so maybe we'll just like shift things around here. I don't know, it's a little bit iffy, but at some point it's somewhere around that ballpark range, so I think it's still fine. You can't sleep on that. Raidraptors, again, I was talking about my good friend Eric, talking about Ghoti. He is going to also play Raidraptors for this format. He also said it would be between like Rogue and tier 2. I was seeing some plays. I'm actually going to put it like maybe edge of tier 2 for now. I was seeing the combo lines and it's like pretty insane how well it can play through multiple interruptions. And you know, sure, they're like new, like Rebellion, Falcon Punch, like it's very good, yes. But I think one thing I'm a little disturbed about it is just it's another like Kali Yuga Turbo kind of thing where you just can't play, right? I really hope those kind of cards all just end up getting banned, you know, like the likes of VFD, whatchamacallit, Azathoth, and I think Utopic Zexal as well. Those are all banned at this point, so maybe Kalyuga's next if this deck actually does well. I'm not exactly sure how well it does going second. Obviously going first, it's like just absolute insane, and I think that's one of the comments about Voiceless Voice I was hearing as well, in terms of one of its weakness being being able to go second. I do think that it has pretty decent non-engine space though, at least, so that's kind of nice. Raidraptors though, it seems like, at least some of the deck lists I was seeing, it doesn't seem like it has as much flexible non-engine space. It seems like it has a lot of archetype cards. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the things to consider there. Mannadium, this one also, I think it should still be tier 1, right? I mean, so far it's done really well post-January ban list. I don't know how much of that changes post-Phantom Nightmare, but I mean, I think it's really, really strong. And of course, Droll is going to be pretty prevalent next format. That is, this deck's kind of Kryptonite. They're probably playing Crossout or something. But, you know, if you don't have Droll, like, this deck is really, really scary going first. Very, very hard to go through their board. So I think this is still worth giving them the respect. Tier Limits is another deck. I would still put it at tier 2 as well. You know, it did get those pretty notable hits on the ban list. Maybe some people wrote them off, but I mean, it's been doing pretty decent. Of course, it actually won that Latin American YCS, remote YCS with Rafael. So I think it's still pretty good. The downside though is, of course, Shifter. If it sees a bit more play again, ironically enough, because of Fire King, then yeah, it can be hard. But you know, at least against Fire Kings, they like pop things, and tier limits, if they're popped, like who cares? Like they just fuse and go off. So I think it's pretty decent. I guess another card deck that pops is Unchained. This is interesting. I think, I don't know, maybe we just put it somewhere in Rogue. I don't want to be too specific again, because regional top wise, if you saw the last 2 weeks worth of January of regional tops, it actually did pretty decent, even with that Charvara hit. So I guess you can't really sleep on them. At the same time, that might kind of change post Phantom Nightmare, but at the very least, they haven't completely been removed from, you know, regional level tops, as maybe a lot of players might have expected. Heroes is another Rogue deck that actually I think deserves some recognition, because it actually has at least 3 regional tops so far post January ban list that are actually known. And they do make Dark Law, being able to banish things again against Fire King, is pretty strong. So it is a pretty I think good rogue strategy. I guess I should have maybe even put Virtual World at that point, because it can make Shen, which is also kind of like another walking macrocosmos, maybe not as good as Dark Law, but they also can play like transaction rollback too, with like the Mayakashi trap, which is kind of toxic. But you know what, they haven't had that much regional success actually so far in this January ban list, so I didn't really put it in here, but that is something worth putting. Dragon Link, this is interesting. It's weird calling Dragon Link Rogue after all this time of how long it's been meta, but you know, regional level top wise, it's got several. I think it's decent, but it's definitely fallen off. Let's just put it Rogue for now. I mean, I'm always like pretty reliant on dragons. I know Konami will always make them pretty good. For now, it hasn't had as much success. I believe it did not get a top at the most recent Latin American YCS either. So we'll just put it there. But you know, certainly feel free to correct me. Phantom Knight, I'm also going to put this here too. It actually, at least at the beginning, first couple weeks of January, got some multiple regional tops, along with, you know, things like the horror stuff. It can be pretty good. Again, one of those decks going first is pretty strong actually, just because with the kind of monster interruptions it puts up, but it usually has like 2 fog blades as well for like the monster negate. So that, you know, like kind of like those kind of balanced kind of boards, it can be really hard to go through. So I do think it's pretty respectable. Oh, Rescue Ace, I mean, that's obviously still going to be tier 1. So far in this January, post-January ban list, this actually has by far the most number of regional tops compared to any other deck out there. Of course, that's probably going to change with Phantom Nightmare. Fire King's probably going to take that top spot, but really can't sleep on Rescue Ace either. It's just like year of fire decks, going to be really strong for all of them. Cashier is another one. I think we have to put it here at tier 2. It may be even better than probably at the best of tier 2, because it can play Shifter, which is of course going to be quite strong. And it's shown actually, especially the last couple of weeks of regionals, it's really gone, I think it was like second most represented in the last 2 weeks worth of regionals. So really strong. I think it has a pretty good place. And you know, Unicorn is pretty strong. It came back to 3. So I think you really have to respect it. And then lastly, another new deck at this point is Yubel. I'm not as confident in this one yet. I think just looking at some of the gameplay, I mean, it seems like it's better just going second. You know, being able to super poly the entire opponent's board is kind of nice, and they don't have to rely only on like hard drawing super poly. They're in Archetype Trap, Eternal Forever. That can also serve as a way to just fuse away like the entire opponent's board into the new Yubel fusion, which is pretty sweet. But at the same time, I think compared to especially like, you know, Voiceless Voice and whatchamacallit, Snake Eye, like compared to those new decks, is really not nearly at the same level. But I think think, I am hopeful that it can do better. I love my fusion deck, so I'm really hoping that it will do better at the regional level once we get them. But anyways, that is it for my tier list. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think are going to be the top decks and how you would change this tier list as well. Really, really open to any kind of feedback. But anyways, a huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons as always. And well, take care, guys.